All right, well, let's get to another big story that we're watching here at Yahoo Finance, and that, of course, is escalating tension between the U.S. and China. Last night, we had President Trump signing a pair of executive orders targeting TikTok and also WeChat. Now, the orders effectively would ban the two apps in the U.S. in 45 days if they are not sold by their Chinese-owned parent companies. And for more on this, we want to bring in Paul Triolo. He's the head of global technology policy at the Eurasia Group. And Paul, the U.S. government citing national security concerns about the two apps. But first, I'm just curious of your geopolitical perspective on this, just what the potential implications of this are, and whether you think this move will likely, I think it will likely be met with retaliation.
Yeah, I think it's important to put this in context. It's really the fifth of some major issues that came out this week. So on Tuesday, we had an announcement of a big U.S. delegation going to Taiwan, the highest level delegation in some time. We've also had Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State, announce a broad initiative around so-called clean networks that actually included the issue of clean app stores. And then yesterday, of course, we had the TikTok and the WeChat executive order drop, and we also had the SEC drop recommendations around delisting Chinese companies on the U.S. stock exchange. And then today, of course, we have the Hong Kong sanctions. So it's been quite a week. We think it's probably been one of the most historic weeks in U.S.-China relations here. And so I think in Beijing, they're sort of digesting all of these things that have been thrown at them this week. I think the TikTok and WeChat executive orders are still, tough to interpret. I think you're right that at a minimum, it looks like it's going to ban the use of these apps in the U.S. The big question is what happens in China, and it's not really clear about what sort of transactions are going to be defined here that are off limits. And so we're still kind of digesting, how the scope of this. For example, I'll just give you one example. I mean, U.S. businesses in China, retail businesses in particular, rely on the WeChat platform in China to do business. And so this is a huge implication if this extends outside the United States. The way this thing is worded, that particularly the WeChat order, is very broad, and it's not clear exactly what kind of transactions are going to be covered by this. And so there's a 45-day window within which the Commerce Department will try to clarify this. But the U.S. companies are right now very worried, particularly those operating in China, that this could have a broader application. But right now, we think it looks like it's focused on the U.S., banning those apps from the U.S. app stores.
Paul, I've been surprised by how relatively restrained the Chinese government has been, at least as it relates to the discussions between Microsoft and TikTok. I mean, we're talking about the one success story for these Chinese companies, TikTok, in terms of what's happening in the U.S. Is WeChat one step too far for the Chinese government? and is that what's going to invite a stronger response?
Well, I think just briefly on TikTok, the official media has been pretty strident on this, calling it sort of robbery that the U.S. is pushing for ByteDance to spin off this very potentially lucrative U.S. operating unit. I think WeChat, it's a good question. I think it'll depend on WeChat. If it's just the U.S. app, the U.S. App Store, if it doesn't go beyond Tencent. I mean, the other thing is that the actual executive order names Tencent. So in a broad interpretation of this could, for example, mean that U.S. companies could not supply the Tencent with semiconductors and software. So it depends on what kind of clarifying rules we get around this from the Commerce Department. I think so. Beijing is probably going to hold fire on this. We've been saying for some time that it's difficult to react to all of these U.S. actions. Beijing has been showing a lot of discipline. They don't want to further poison the business climate in China by targeting U.S. companies, for example, operating in China. So they're in a really difficult place where, they don't want to do things to make things worse, but they're going to probably at some point have to respond.
And Paul, just off of that, so what kind of response are you expecting from China? And what does this say about the future of tech companies and the U.S. and China? Where does this all end?
Well, that's a great question. I think, I think that we're going to continue to see this disciplined response. The Chinese have not, for example, rolled out this so-called unreliable entity list. And they've also threatened things, for example, like harassing U.S. companies around antitrust and enforcement of things around the cybersecurity law, for example. So we might see some targeted action against U.S. companies once it becomes clear, for example, how broad this WeChat ban is going to go. But yeah, I think for the longer term, we're digging a big hole here on the U.S.-China, what we call the U.S.-China tech Cold War. So I think the only way right now is down. The U.S. is going to probably, for example, slap more companies in China with this entity list action, denying them access to U.S. technology. So right now we don't see sort of the floor of this, and the big question is how badly Beijing is going to react to all this. And I think they're still calculating this. There's a big leadership meeting this week in Beidaihe, and they'll be talking about this. I think the system they're reeling from a lot of things: Hong Kong, Taiwan, the South China Sea, Xinjiang, a lot of U.S. sanctions, and I think they're trying to figure out how to respond across all these issues.
And Paul, I just wanted to quickly ask you, just in regards to Tencent, I mean, it's no secret that they have significant stakes in a lot of tech companies in the U.S. and gaming companies. I mean, Snap, Tesla, Activision, Blizzard, just to name a couple. So when we talk about this attack on Tencent in regards to WeChat, what are the implications for the stakes of these companies? I mean, what is the future for that? Do we know?
That's a good question. I think we don't know. I mean, it's possible that this executive order is written in such a way that they're really talking about the national security concerns around WeChat, data privacy, censorship. So activities involving Tencent that are outside of that narrow national security scope could be okay. Things like you mentioned, like investments. Gaming is a little bit trickier because there's a big U.S. gaming component to this. We haven't seen gaming on the radar yet of U.S. authorities. That could happen. But I think that my sense is that they're going to try to keep this somewhat narrow. The executive orders are written very broadly, and probably the clarifying language around them will try to narrow the scope of this so that it doesn't preclude companies from collaborating with Tencent in other areas like investment, autonomous vehicles, et cetera.
Yeah, certainly an interesting story, and one that's almost by the hour. So Paul Triolo, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us, Head of Global Technology Policy at Eurasia Group. We hope to have you back soon. Thanks so much. Have a great day.